The Raft of the Medusa is a well-known romantic painting, but what makes it important to you is how the artist Theodore Gericault came to paint such a confronting image. There is a backstory which you need to hear before you can actually understand what motivated him to pursue this as his topic and subject matter. Gericault came from a wealthy French family and chose for his vocation in life to be an artist. He left France in search of artistic inspiration in Rome. While he was away, the subject of the painting The Raft of the Medusa, the survivors from the frigate the Medusa, came into trouble. Gericault missed all the newspaper stories that reported the scandal about this event. The ship was sent to reclaim the former African territories in Senegal on the west coast. The captain of the ship, Viscount Hugues de Roy de Chemerays, excuse my French, was given the job as captain, not for his skill, but because of his royal connections. The captain was more interested in impressing the soon-to-be governor of Senegal, Colonel Schmaltz. The frigate, the Medusa, would have never gotten into dire straits if the captain was not trying to impress the governor. The captain pushed the crew to go faster and to travel close to the shore so that he could overtake the other ships travelling with them. The Medusa ran ashore on a sandbank. Efforts to free the ship failed. A decision was made for the people on board to travel the rest of the journey in the 6 lifeboats. There were 400 people on board and space only for 250. So 146 men and 1 woman were piled onto a hastily built raft. The raft partially submerged once it was loaded. 17 crew chose to stay with the ship. The captain and crew intended to tow the raft, but only after a few miles the raft was turned loose. All they had to survive with on the raft was a bag of ship's biscuits, which they ate on the first day, 2 casks of water, which they lost overboard during a fight, and 6 casks of wine. Once cut loose, the raft was at the mercy of the currents and drifted far off course. The survivors on the raft were pushed to the extremes. Crazy, thirsty, and starving, they slaughtered those who rebelled, ate their dead companions, and killed the weakest. Many suicided, throwing themselves to the ever-present sharks. 13 days later, they were rescued by chance by the ship called the Argus. Only 15 remained of the original 146. The incident caused a huge public scandal, and the French monarchy was severely embarrassed. Gericault returns to Paris, and the Medusa scandal is still gossip. He met a group of people at the home of a friend where he hears parts of the tale for the first time. Gericault was looking for a new subject to paint and thought there could be something in this story. So he begins his research. Firstly, he went to the local newspaper, the Journal des Débats. He was looking specifically for any contacts to any of the 15 survivors. With help, he tracks down Dr. J.B. Henry Savigny and Alexander Corriard, a cartographer, which is a map drawer. He invites them to come and stay at his home. They accept his offer readily as they are very sick and in desperate need of support. Slowly he coaxes the 2 men to tell him their horrid tale. He also found out that the ship's carpenter survived. He sent for the carpenter asking him to create a replica of the raft in Gericault's studio. The carpenter agrees to build the raft but refuses to tell his story. Later, Gericault found and interviewed another survivor, Thomas the helmsman. His account of their time on the raft is gruesome and horrifying, but he proves significant by filling in the gaps that Savigny and Corriard were hesitant to recall. It is through this conversation with Thomas that Gericault makes the decision that the moment of rescue will be the scene for his painting. So why learn about the Raft of the Medusa? It is a romantic painting from a French artist made almost 200 years ago. Unfortunately, not a great deal in the world has changed. He, like us, was inspired by a contemporary event reported on in his local media and discussed by many people who had heard the story. No doubt plenty had their own opinions to add. Again, not a lot has changed. For Gericault, it became the beginning of his extensive research to find for himself the most emotionally evocative way to communicate the story to his audience. As we know already, he begins by finding out about the event from gossip, reading newspaper accounts, and then he interviews several of the survivors. He asks the ship's carpenter to build a scaled-down model of the raft in his studio. Keeping with academic tradition, he decides to make the work very large, therefore emphasizing the importance of the event. He starts by sketching from his imagination, and finding that approach inadequate, he decides to go to the local morgue and buys dead bodies and parts of bodies, which he takes home to sketch and paint from. He arranges the macabre bodies on the model raft and continues his studies. His friends think he is mad, and the stench of rotting flesh is almost unbearable. Gericault uses compositional devices used by romantic artists to heighten the drama of the scene. Diagonal lines and triangles intersect and work together to cause the audience's eye to travel across the vast canvas. The horizon is almost completely hidden as the waves churn the lurching raft across the ocean. In the distance is the Argus, their object of hope. The audience is met first with a confronting image of human suffering and grief beyond imagining. And Gericault also uses this painting to make cultural references well known by his audience at the time. The act of cannibalism, which, when literally portrayed, lost all impact and meaning, and became instead a pantomime of men and the vile scraps of their repast, a foot, an arm, and obscene doodles from caricature. So Gericault decides to actually present the whole idea of cannibalism by connecting it to a really well-known story that the audience would know. The image of the figure leaning forward, his elbow on one knee, a fist propped beneath his chin, the folds of a head cloth spilling over his shoulders, his right arm pulls the corpse of a young boy against him. This part of the painting is a reference to a writer, a poet, a playwright called Dante, and he created this artwork or this play called The Divine Comedy. And there is a character in this comedy called Count Ugolino, and there's a part of the story where he's starving amongst his dying children in the Pisan Tower. So what happens is the prisoners, being the father and the children, are slowly starving to death, and before dying, Ugolino's children beg him to eat their bodies. They say, "Father, our pain," they said, "will lessen if you eat us. You are the one who clothed us with this wretched flesh. We plead for you to be the one who strips it away." And Ugolino says, "And I, already going blind, groped over my brood calling to them, though I had watched them die for 2 long days, and then the hunger had more power than even sorrow over me." Ugolino's statement that hunger proves stronger than grief. And so by choosing to do this reference, Gericault makes such a potent comment about what it would have been like to be on this raft, and really draws the audience in to start to imagine themselves subjectively how they would have responded in the same circumstances. So although this is a brief look at Gericault's The Raft of the Medusa, hopefully you can now see how artists can be inspired by events reported at the time. These events can then lead an artist to embark on extensive research in an attempt to better understand what has happened, and then to reach out to an audience with the completed work to touch both their emotions and their humanity. No great art just happens. It is always the result of processing, research, and experimentation.